Good morning. You are listening to Silent Waves Radio. I'm Alex Mercer, and we are interrupting our regular programming to bring you what appears to be a developing situation of extraordinary magnitude here in the United States. We want to be careful with our language in these early moments, because the information we're receiving is fragmented. It is coming in from multiple directions simultaneously, and we have not yet been able to verify everything to the standard we hold ourselves to on this network. What we can tell you with confidence, as of right now, is this. Approximately 40 minutes ago, a coordinated series of events began unfolding across at least 6 major American cities. We have reports of military vehicles moving through downtown Washington, D.C. We have reports of the Federal Communications Commission building in the Capitol going dark. We have unverified accounts of aircraft, military aircraft, holding patterns above 3 major metropolitan areas. I want to be very clear about what we do not know yet. We do not know who is directing this. We do not know whether the President of the United States is currently reachable or in a secure location. And we do not know whether the civilian government of this country remains intact. I'm joined this morning by my co-host Sierra Lane, and together we are going to bring you everything as it comes in, as carefully and as accurately as we humanly can.
Thank you, Alex, and I want to echo that commitment to accuracy because I know there are people listening to us right now who are frightened. People pulling over on the highway to hear this better, people sitting in their kitchens with coffee going cold on the counter, staring at the radio because their television has gone out, people calling their parents, their children, their sisters. I want to acknowledge that before we go any further, because the human instinct right now, the instinct everyone is feeling, is to find out whether the people they love are safe. We understand that. We feel that too. What we're going to do this morning is stay with you, stay on the air for as long as we are able, and give you the clearest picture we can of what is happening to this country. We have correspondents trying to reach us from Washington, from Chicago, from Los Angeles, from Dallas, and from Atlanta. We are working every line we have. Alex, let's start with what we know geographically, because I think listeners need to understand the scope of where this is happening.
Right. So geographically, the pattern that is emerging, and I want to stress that word, pattern, because this does not appear to be random. The pattern suggests pre-planned simultaneous action across what military analysts would call strategic command nodes. Washington, D.C. is the obvious focal point. We are receiving reports that both the 14th Street Bridge and the Memorial Bridge have been closed by military vehicles. That is significant, not merely as symbolism, but as logistics. Those 2 bridges are primary evacuation arteries from the capital into Virginia. Closing them simultaneously restricts movement in and out of the city's core. We are also receiving reports, again unverified, that Andrews Air Force Base, which is Joint Base Andrews, has gone to what appears to be an internal lockdown, meaning civilian air traffic in and out has been suspended. Now, simultaneously, in Chicago, there are reports of National Guard units, or units using National Guard vehicles, moving along Lakeshore Drive toward the Loop. In Los Angeles, our West Coast affiliate attempted to contact us 17 minutes ago and reached us only briefly before the line dropped. They indicated that the Port of Los Angeles, which is the largest commercial port in the Western Hemisphere, had been approached by what appeared to be Coast Guard cutters operating under unusual radio protocols. I want to hold these facts very carefully, because each one individually could have an explanation. Together, they form something that is very difficult to explain away.
And while Alex is laying out that geographic picture, I want to tell you what we're hearing from the people inside those places. Because geography is coordinates on a map, but cities are people. We have a text message, actually a series of text messages, that have been forwarded to us by a listener in Bethesda, Maryland, from someone she describes as her neighbor who commutes into D.C. every morning. This neighbor was, as of about 30 minutes ago, on the metro, the Red Line, heading into the city, And she says, and I'm going to read this carefully, she says, quote, "Train stop between Tenleytown and Friendship Heights. Lights flickering. Conductor not saying anything. There are people crying in my car. Someone near the door keeps hitting it. It's very hot." And then about 12 minutes later, another message. "They told us to exit at Tenleytown and walk. Platform is packed. I can hear helicopters, but I can't see through the station ceiling. Trying to call you, but nothing is going through." And then the messages stop. That woman is somewhere in Washington, D.C. right now, and her neighbor who sent those to us has not heard from her since. I think it's important that we hold that story alongside the facts Alex is giving us, because that is what this looks like from the inside.
We've just received a written statement. This has come through our digital wire service, and it is attributed to a spokesperson for the Department of Defense. I want to read this in full because it is unusual in both its brevity and its phrasing. The statement reads, "The United States military is currently engaged in a constitutional continuity operation. All civilian personnel are advised to remain indoors and await further instruction from authorized military communications channels. Essential services will be maintained. This operation is expected to resolve within 72 hours. Further statements will be issued at intervals to be determined." That is the full text of the statement. I have read it 3 times in the past 4 minutes, trying to parse it. The phrase, constitutional continuity operation, does not appear in any standard Department of Defense communication protocol that our legal and military analysts are aware of. It is not a recognized designation. Continuity of government is a recognized framework, but that is distinct from what is being described here. The phrase, authorized military communications channels, is particularly notable because it implies that civilian communications channels, meaning networks like this one, meaning the free press, are being implicitly categorized as something other than authorized. I do not want to alarm, but I do want to name what I'm reading. And the phrase, expected to resolve within 72 hours, is, in the context of what we're watching unfold geographically, a phrase I do not know how to interpret charitably.
I have to be honest with you, and I think Alex would agree, that statement landed in our newsroom, and it went very quiet. Very quiet. Very fast. Because when a government tells its people to wait for instructions from the military rather than from elected officials, something fundamental has shifted. We are now about 1 hour and 15 minutes into this event, and we still have not heard from the sitting President of the United States. We have not heard from the Speaker of the House. We have not heard from a Supreme Court Justice. We have not heard from any state governor. We have heard from the Department of Defense. Only. We have a listener message I want to share, but this came through our public inbox, and I want to be transparent that we cannot verify it, but it corroborates other things we're hearing. The listener writes, "I'm a retired federal employee, 31 years in public service, and I have never once been unable to reach the switchboard at the Capitol building in my life. Not during snowstorms, not during 9/11, not during anything. I have been calling the Capitol switchboard for the past 40 minutes. It rings twice and then goes to a tone I've never heard before, not a busy signal. Something else. I don't know what to do with that. I'm just sitting here." I'm reading that because I think it matters that people know they are not alone in noticing that something is wrong with the basic machinery of how this government communicates with itself and with its citizens.
Let me bring in some incoming information from our affiliate in Chicago, because this is significant. Our Chicago correspondent, I should say, someone at our Chicago affiliate, was able to reach us by phone approximately 4 minutes ago before that line also dropped. Here's what they reported verbally. Military convoy, estimated 15 to 20 vehicles including Humvees, and what appeared to be light armored personnel carriers, moved down South Michigan Avenue in the Loop District of Chicago, beginning at approximately 1 hour and 5 minutes ago. The convoy did not stop. It moved in formation through red lights, through intersections, and it stopped at Daley Plaza. Our correspondent said, and these are her words, "They stopped at Daley Plaza and then they just waited. They didn't get out. Nobody got out. Engines on. They just sat there." She then said that Chicago police units arrived at the plaza perimeter approximately 8 minutes later, and there appeared to be a conversation, a radio conversation, between CPD command vehicles and the military convoy. She could not hear the content of that conversation. She then said that 2 additional military vehicles arrived, and that a figure, she described him as an officer in full uniform, though she could not identify rank from her position, stepped out and entered the City Hall building. At that point, the line dropped. That account places military personnel inside a major American city's seat of municipal government. 1 hour and 9 minutes into this event.
1 hour and 9 minutes. I keep thinking about that because for most of the people in Chicago this morning, 1 hour and 9 minutes ago, they were making breakfast. They were getting their kids ready for school. They were sitting on the train exactly like that woman in Washington was sitting on the metro. They had no idea, and now they're watching this through their windows. We've had several listeners from the Chicago area reach us. One person, they didn't give a name, they just said they were in the Gold Coast neighborhood on the north side. They said, and I'm reading directly, I can see Navy Pier from my building. There are 2 gray vessels I've never seen before sitting just off the pier. They look Coast Guard, but larger. They haven't moved. My building manager just came over the intercom and told everyone to stay in their units. I live here alone. I'm scared. That person is alone in their apartment right now watching ships they don't recognize sit in Lake Michigan. And that is happening in the 3rd largest city in the United States of America. I want to let that sit for a moment before we go on because we move very fast in this format and these are human beings we're talking about.
Sierra, we have a significant development and I need to bring it in. Our digital wire just received what appears to be a fragmentary communication from a source identifying themselves as a federal judicial official. I want to be very careful here because we cannot confirm the identity or the authenticity of this source. But I'm going to read it because it contains information that may be of critical importance to our listeners. The source writes, I am a judicial officer in a federal district. I will not identify my district for my safety. Beginning at approximately 5:50 a.m. Eastern Time, I received a call on my personal line from a colleague in Washington, a colleague I have known for 22 years. She told me that she had been contacted by members of the Joint Chiefs and instructed, her word, instructed, not to report to her chambers today. She said the same instruction had been communicated to at least 4 other federal judges she knew of personally. She was distressed. I have not been able to reach her since that call. A federal judicial officer reporting that sitting federal judges were told by elements of the Joint Chiefs not to report to their chambers. If accurate, this represents a direct interference with the judicial branch of the United States government. That is the 3rd branch of government, alongside the legislative and executive, that appears to have been disrupted as of what is now approaching 1 hour and 40 minutes into this event.
Alex, I have Dallas on the line. I have a woman named, she asked us to call her Marlene. She's calling from Dallas, Texas, and she's been on hold for about 12 minutes. Marlene, you're on Silent Waves Radio. Tell us what you're seeing.
We're listening, Marlene.
She says, she's describing, okay, Marlene's voice is very shaken, so let me relay what she's saying. She's in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, which is south of the Trinity River, south of downtown. She says that beginning about an hour ago, she heard what she thought was thunder, but was not thunder. She says it was sustained, rhythmic, and came from the direction of downtown. She says several neighbors have come out onto their street and they are talking to each other and they are frightened. She says she can now see smoke. She says she can see smoke rising from what she believes to be the direction of Love Field, which is Dallas Love Field Airport, a major domestic airport inside the city limits. She says it is not a large smoke plume, but it is consistent, and it has been there for at least 25 minutes and no fire department has passed her street. Marlene, is there anything else? She says her husband is a veteran. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and she says, he looked at that smoke, and he came inside, and he told me to lock the doors. He knows what that means, and he won't tell me, and that's the part that scares me the most. Marlene, thank you for calling us. Please, stay inside and stay safe. We're going to take a short break from caller accounts and return to our reporting.
I want to try to step back and provide some structural context for what we are describing. because I think listeners deserve to understand what a coup, in the technical sense, actually looks like in its opening hours, and why it doesn't always look like what fiction has trained us to expect. A successful seizure of governmental authority by a military faction is not typically characterized by gunfire in the streets and tanks crashing through gates. Those images come from historical coups in nations with weaker institutional infrastructure, where the military simply overwhelmed civilian resistance because civilian institutions were already fragile. In a country like the United States, which has a deeply embedded constitutional framework, a robust civilian bureaucracy, and 330 million people, the opening hours of such an event look much more like what we are describing. They look like selective infrastructure disruption. They look like communications nodes going quiet in sequence. They look like military assets positioning at strategic points without firing weapons. They look like official communications being issued in confusing bureaucratic language that is legal enough to forestall immediate resistance, but vague enough to preserve maximum operational flexibility. What we are seeing, and I say this as an observation, not a characterization, matches the opening playbook of what historians and political scientists refer to as a soft coup, or a constitutional coup, meaning an effort to seize power while maintaining the formal vocabulary of legality. That is what makes it particularly difficult to respond to.
And I want to build on what Alex just said, because when you use the technical language, the clear analytical language, which is exactly right, that's exactly the right language for this, you risk making something feel distant that is not distant at all. So let me say it plainly. If what Alex is describing is accurate, then the government of the United States, as it existed this morning when most people woke up, the elected government, the courts, the legislature, the presidency, the systems that have held this country together for over 2 centuries, that government is being forcibly replaced right now while we are on the air, while you are driving to work, while your kids are wondering why school hasn't started, while the coffee is still hot. It is happening now. And the question that I keep returning to, the question I cannot stop thinking about, is where are the people whose job it is to stop this? Where is Congress? We should be hearing from members of Congress right now. We should be hearing senators calling into radio programs and television networks. We should be hearing the Speaker of the House convening an emergency session. Where are they?
That question leads me to a piece of information that arrived in our newsroom 7 minutes ago, and I have had 2 of our senior producers attempting to corroborate it before bringing it on air. Here is what we have. A congressional staffer, someone who works in the Senate office building complex on Capitol Hill, reached out to us through a secure messaging application. They describe themselves as being, and I quote, physically barred from entering the Russell Senate office building. They say that there are military personnel, uniformed personnel, stationed at the entrances to the building. Not Capitol Police who normally staff those entrances. Military personnel. They say that several of their colleagues who arrived early this morning were permitted to enter before, apparently, the order changed, and that those colleagues are now unreachable. They describe the scene on the Capitol grounds as, quote, quiet, which is wrong. It should never be quiet there at this hour. There are usually people everywhere. There's nobody. This source then adds one more detail that I want to flag specifically. They say that the American flag above the Capitol building is still flying. I am noting that because, historically, the replacement or removal of national symbols has often been used as a marker of the completion of governmental transition. The flag is still there. That suggests to me that whoever is orchestrating this is, at minimum, maintaining the visual iconography of the constitutional state, at least for now.
We are now 2 hours into this event. 2 hours, and I want to track something for our listeners because I think it's important to watch the numbers as they come in. 2 hours ago, we had 0 confirmed civilian injuries reported. As of the information coming into our newsroom right now, we are receiving, and these are preliminary, These are unverified, but they are consistent across multiple sources. We are receiving reports of at least 14 injuries in Washington, D.C., described by emergency responders who have reached our lines as resulting from crowd-related incidents. Crushes, falls, one report of a cardiac event in a metro station. Not gunfire, not explosions, panic. The city is panicking, and panic is physically dangerous. From Chicago, we have a report from what appears to be a local emergency dispatcher, speaking to us anonymously, who says that they have received 73 emergency calls in the past 90 minutes relating to what they classify as civil disturbance incidents, which includes car accidents caused by people driving erratically, assaults connected to arguments at gas stations, because apparently there are lines forming at gas stations in the Chicago metro area, and at least 2 incidents of looting reported in the South Side. From Los Angeles, we have lost contact with our affiliate entirely, and that silence is itself a data point I do not know how to read except to say it is not good.
I want to address the communications blackouts, because I think they're important to understand technically. What appears to be happening is not a total communications shutdown in the traditional sense. The internet remains partially operational. Our broadcast signal remains on air. Though I want listeners to know we are monitoring our transmitter status very carefully, and we are prepared to shift to backup systems if necessary. What is being disrupted appears to be selective. Government phone lines. Broadcast affiliates in specific markets. We've confirmed that at least 3 major television networks have gone off air or switched to emergency standby signals in the past 30 minutes, which means that radio, and specifically networks like Silent Waves Radio, may be among the last broadcast options available to civilians in affected areas. I want to say that plainly, so people understand the value of keeping this signal on. Additionally, we are receiving reports that GPS signals in several metropolitan areas are exhibiting anomalies. Our technology correspondent, who reached us briefly by landline, used the term spoofing, the artificial manipulation of GPS signals to create navigational confusion. If accurate, this would further complicate the ability of first responders, National Guard units loyal to civilian authority, and ordinary citizens trying to flee urban areas to navigate effectively. It's a level of technical sophistication that points toward a well-resourced, well-planned operation.
We've just received something through our listener inbox that I want to share, because it's one of those moments where the human dimension of this story hits very hard. This is a message from someone who identifies himself as a man named Terrence, writing from Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta is a city we have not had specific reports from yet, but that absence itself is perhaps something to note. Terrence writes, I am a nurse at a hospital in the metro Atlanta area. I am not going to say which hospital because I'm worried about what might happen. We had a situation this morning starting around 6 a.m. Eastern. The hospital administrator came to our floor and told us that we were receiving a directive to prepare for mass casualty protocols. Not because of anything that had happened yet, but as a precaution. I have worked in trauma nursing for 16 years. I have done mass casualty drills. I have never been told to activate those protocols as a precaution on a Tuesday morning with no prior warning. We are currently doubling our blood supply inventory. We are calling in off-duty staff. We are pulling equipment out of storage. My patients are asking me what's happening, and I don't know what to tell them. Some of them can't leave. Some of them can't even sit up. I don't know what to tell them. A trauma nurse, 16 years of experience, activating mass casualty protocols as a precaution, and not knowing what to say to the patients who cannot leave. I think that is a picture of this country right now. People doing the next right thing, the professional thing, the trained thing, with the full weight of not knowing pressing down on them.
2 hours and 20 minutes in, a new development. We have just received, through what appears to be a broadcast signal, an audio statement. I want to be completely transparent. This statement appeared to originate from what is identified as a military emergency broadcast frequency. It is not the standard emergency alert system tone most listeners would recognize from weather emergencies. It is a different frequency, a different format. Our technical team has been able to receive and record it, and I'm going to read you the transcript of its content. The statement, read by a voice that sounds male, mature, and carefully composed, says, Citizens of the United States, this is General Thomas Hargrove, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At 0400 hours Eastern Time today, acting on the authority vested in the senior military leadership of this nation, under conditions of constitutional emergency, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, acting unanimously and in coordination with commanders of all active duty branches, initiated Operation Constitutional Anchor. This operation is designed to prevent the imminent collapse of the federal government and the irreversible corruption of democratic institutions. The civilian executive and legislative branches were notified of this action at 0340 Fatjam. The current President of the United States has been secured at an undisclosed location for his safety. The Congress is in suspension, pending verification of its legitimacy. The military of the United States is now the guardian of the Constitution until civilian elections can be organized under military oversight within 18 months. We ask for your patience and your trust. End of statement.
I need to take a breath. I think everyone listening needs to take a breath because we just heard, on a military broadcast frequency, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff declare that the civilian government of the United States has been suspended. The Congress is in suspension. The president has been secured. These are not phrases from a constitutional system. These are phrases from a coup. And I want to be precise with that word because we have been careful about it, we have been deliberately careful and measured, and Alex has laid out the technical case. But now a general has spoken on a broadcast frequency and told the American people that their elected government is gone. And he called it constitutional anchor. He attached the word constitutional to it. Because whoever planned this understood that the way to paralyze a nation raised to revere its constitution is to claim loudly and early that what you are doing is actually in service of that constitution. It is extraordinarily sophisticated. And it is terrifying. Not in a dramatic way, not in a movie way, in a quiet, cold, deeply real way that I suspect many of our listeners are feeling right now in their chest, in their stomach, in the way their hands have gone still.
General Thomas Hargrove is a real person. I want to clarify for our listeners that we cannot confirm whether the voice in that broadcast was genuinely General Hargrove or someone using his name and authority. The name Thomas Hargrove does correspond to a recently appointed chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and that's the extent of what I can confirm. What I can tell you is that the statement, whoever made it, is now out there. It has been broadcast. And in a situation like this, the broadcast of such a statement, regardless of its authenticity, changes the situation on the ground because it changes what people believe is happening. It gives shape to the confusion. It answers the question, what is this? With an answer that people can hold. And the answer it offers is, the military is in charge now. We are now beginning to receive reports from international media. The BBC World Service is on air and has been covering this event. They are reporting that the United Kingdom has called an emergency session of its National Security Council. They are reporting that the Canadian Prime Minister has made a statement calling what is happening in the United States, quote, profound threat to the democratic world order, and has ordered the closure of 3 major border crossings, specifically noting Niagara Falls, Detroit-Windsor, and Buffalo. Germany's foreign ministry has issued a statement calling on allied nations to consider emergency consultations. NATO's Secretary General, according to the BBC, has called an emergency convening, which under NATO charter provisions can occur within hours of a request. This story has crossed every border.
Canada closing border crossings. That lands differently than I expected it to. Because we think of Canada as our neighbor, our closest neighbor, the country that shares more border with us than any other. And the image of those crossings closing is the image of a door being shut. A neighbor looking through the glass and deciding to lock the deadbolt. I want to think about the people at those crossings right now. There are people trying to cross right now, people with dual citizenship, people with children in one country and parents in another, people who are in the middle of crossing, when the word came down. We have a listener message from a woman named Patricia, who says she is sitting in a car on the American side of the Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron, Michigan. That bridge crosses into Sarnia, Ontario. And she says there are hundreds of cars. She says people have gotten out of their cars and they're standing on the bridge. Canadian Border Services have stopped all processing. She says there are children crying in the car next to her. She says she drove through the night from Indianapolis because she has family in Ontario, and she does not know if she'll make it across. She says she's listening to us on her car radio. Patricia, we hear you. We don't know what the next hour holds, but we hear you, and you are not alone out there on that bridge.
3 hours in. Let me give you a casualty update as best we can construct one. These numbers are preliminary. They are sourced from multiple unverified reports, and they should be understood as estimates. In Washington, D.C., we are now hearing of at least 43 civilian injuries, primarily from crowd-related incidents, vehicle collisions in mass evacuation attempts on Route 50 and I-66, and at least 2 incidents that have been described by sources as exchanges between military units and what are being described as armed private individuals. We do not have confirmed fatalities from Washington yet, but the language being used by emergency responders who've reached us is not optimistic. From Chicago, a source at a Level 1 trauma center on the near north side says that the hospital has received 11 patients in the past 2 hours with injuries consistent with crowd events and physical altercations. From Dallas, we know there has been an incident at Love Field Airport, the smoke Marlene reported, and we're now receiving word through our wire that there has been what is being described as an aircraft incident at the airport involving a departure runway. Passengers attempting to flee the city on commercial flights. We do not know the details of that incident. We do not know if there are fatalities. I am telling you what we have because you deserve the information as we receive it, incomplete as it is.
And I want to stay with Dallas for a moment because Love Field is not just an airport in an abstract sense. Love Field is where, in 1963, the body of a murdered president was brought home. It is a place with a specific weight in the American consciousness. And now there is smoke rising from it, and a runway incident, and people who were trying to get out. Were those passengers just people who were scared? Were they executives with private aircraft? Were they families with tickets booked weeks ago for a vacation who woke up this morning and decided they were leaving? I keep thinking about the particular experience of being in an airport and hearing that the flights are grounded. Because we have reports from multiple airports now, that civilian air traffic has been suspended nationwide. The FAA's system, the NOTAM system, the Notice to Air Missions system went to a total ground stop approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes ago. That is an action that the FAA has taken only a handful of times in American history, always under extraordinary circumstances. Every commercial flight that was airborne when that order came has been diverted to the nearest available airport. Thousands of passengers are sitting in aircraft on tarmacs right now. Thousands more are stranded in terminal buildings. O'Hare International, Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson, JFK LAX, Denver, Phoenix. Every major hub in this country has tens of thousands of people in it right now who cannot leave.
We have just received audio. This is a recording. It was sent to us through our digital intake system. It appears to have been recorded on a phone and uploaded from somewhere in the greater Washington, D.C. area. I'm going to play a brief excerpt, and then we will discuss what we're hearing. The audio is approximately 45 seconds long, and it captures the sound, predominantly the sound, of a street environment. There are voices. There is what sounds like mechanical rumbling, possibly vehicles, and there is one clear voice that says, and I want to quote this exactly, "They're not stopping for anyone. They're just going through. Don't step off the curb." And then a second voice, much quieter, says, "Where's the police? Why aren't the police here?" And the first voice responds, "I don't know, I don't know." That's the full audible content. The street sounds, the mechanical rumbling, and 2 people on a sidewalk somewhere in America's capital city watching a military column move through the streets and asking where the police are. I have verified with our legal team that we are within our rights to share this audio. We believe it to be authentic based on consistent background noise. What we cannot tell you is precisely what street this was recorded on, or precisely what the vehicles were.
That second voice asking where the police are, that question is going to stay with me. Where are the police? Where are the firefighters, the EMTs, the first responders who are supposed to hold the civil order in place? Part of the answer, I think, is that they are responding. They are responding to the 70-plus emergency calls in Chicago. They are responding to the incidents at Love Field. They are responding to the crush at the metro stations in D.C. They are doing their jobs as best they can inside a situation that their training did not specifically prepare them for. But I also want to raise a harder question, and I want to raise it honestly. Because in a coup, and we are now using that word, in a coup, one of the first and most important variables is how the rank and file of every institution responds. Every police officer, every National Guard member, every government employee, every person who shows up to their desk tomorrow morning faces a choice that most of them never expected to face. Do you follow the orders that are coming through the normal chain of command, even if that chain of command has been captured? Or do you refuse? And if you refuse, what does that look like? What do you do? Where do you go? We are hearing already of small acts of resistance. A police captain in Baltimore who reportedly told his officers that they are to follow civilian law, period, and that no military directive supersedes that authority. We are hearing of federal employees in agencies throughout D.C. who are reportedly staying at their desks and refusing to leave. We don't know how those stories end yet.
3 hours and 20 minutes in. Here is a power grid update. We have been in contact with what appears to be a grid operator, a person who manages regional power distribution, who reached us from somewhere in the mid-Atlantic region. They have asked to remain anonymous, and I think that request is understandable. They say that they are observing unusual patterns in the transmission network. Specifically, they describe what they call selective load shedding, meaning the deliberate reduction of electrical load in specific geographic areas. They say that in the past hour and a half, load has been reduced in at least 3 congressional districts in the Virginia suburbs of D.C. They say it is subtle enough that most residents won't notice unless they're watching their smart meters, but significant enough that it would, in their words, make sustained resistance activity significantly harder. They also note that 3 cellular towers in northwest Washington, D.C. have gone offline in the past 40 minutes. Not all towers, specific towers, located in neighborhoods that are home to many federal employees and government officials. The selectivity of these outages is, technically speaking, a very sophisticated capability. It requires inside knowledge of grid infrastructure. It requires either the cooperation or the neutralization of the people who normally operate those systems.
We have a caller. We have a caller who says she is a member of Congress. I need to be very transparent with our listeners that we cannot verify this claim. We have no way to verify this claim, but I am going to put her on because the information she is providing, if true, is of enormous public importance. She has asked us to refer to her only as a member from the South. She says she woke up this morning to her phone going dead, her personal cell phone. She says she drove to her office in the Congressional Office Complex. She was turned away by uniformed personnel. She drove around the perimeter and she says, I counted them. I counted at least 40 uniformed personnel around the Capitol complex that I have never seen before. Not Capitol Police uniforms. Something different. She says she has been in contact with 6 other members of Congress who she's been able to reach by landline through a private number. She says there is discussion among them about whether they can formally declare a quorum and hold an emergency session of Congress somewhere. She mentioned the phrase, somewhere other than the Capitol. She says they are trying to reach a constitutional lawyer. She says the most frightening thing is not what they see. The most frightening thing is what they don't see. She says, the people who should be calling us aren't. The networks that should be active aren't. The silence is the scariest part. She then disconnected. We don't know who she is. We don't know if she's real. But what she described is consistent with everything else we're hearing this morning.
I want to pause for a moment on something important that I think deserves direct acknowledgement. We at Silent Waves Radio are still on the air. We have been on the air for 3 hours and 31 minutes covering this event. And I want to tell you what that means, because it may not be obvious. It means that either we have not yet been considered a sufficient threat to operations to warrant shutdown, or our signal has not been fully mapped, or there is some internal disagreement among those directing this operation about the value of shutting down independent media versus the political cost of being seen to do so. I do not know which of those explanations is correct. I do know that the fact that we're still broadcasting is something I am not taking for granted, and I want our listeners to understand that we are aware of our own fragility here. We are recording everything. We are backing up our archives to every available server we have access to. We are documenting. And if this signal goes dark, I want to say this clearly, if this signal goes dark, it will not be because we chose to stop. It will be because we were stopped. Keep that distinction in mind.
Alex is right, and I want to add something to that, which is that in the history of coups around the world, independent radio has often been among the last forms of free communication to fall, and also among the most important. Because radio is simple. Radio requires minimal infrastructure compared to television. Radio reaches into cars, into remote areas, into places where the internet has failed. If you are listening to us right now in a part of the country where the lights are out and your phone isn't working, you have a radio, and we are here. Hold on to that. Hold on to this frequency. Tell your neighbors. Tell the people on your street. We've had a message from a listener in rural West Virginia who says that her community has organized a kind of relay system. People driving to neighbors who don't have radios, telling them to tune to us, creating a literal chain of information. That is people doing what humans do. That is community. That is what no military operation can fully account for. The organic, stubborn, irreducible tendency of human beings to find each other and share what they know.
4 hours. We have reached the 4-hour mark. I want to give listeners a comprehensive picture of where we are. Nationally, the physical situation is this. The Capitol building remains under military control. The White House communications channels remain dark, though the building itself has not been reported as damaged or stormed. The Supreme Court building, we have a report, just coming in, that the Supreme Court building has been closed. A source outside the building says the doors are locked and there is no one visible inside or outside in the court's normal staff capacity. Andrews Joint Base remains in lockdown. Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, the largest naval installation in the world, has gone to an internal security protocol, and we're hearing from a source that some personnel at Norfolk are in a state of significant tension about which orders to follow. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group, which was conducting exercises in the Atlantic approximately 200 miles off the Virginia coast, has gone radio silent. A carrier strike group going radio silent is not a normal operational posture in peacetime. We do not know what that means, but it is a development I flag because it suggests that the military itself may not be fully unified behind what is happening.
And that last point from Alex, the possibility that the military itself is not unified, that is, I think, the hinge point on which this entire event will ultimately turn. Because here's the thing that the historical record shows us about coups, including successful ones. They succeed when the institutions they move against do not resist coherently. When there is confusion and division among the institutions being displaced, and they fail, or they fail eventually, when those institutions find a way to organize. When enough people say no. We are hearing stories of that happening, that police captain in Baltimore. The congressional members trying to find a place to hold a session. The federal employees at their desks. A judge somewhere. We received a brief message from someone identifying as a federal court clerk who says that a judge in their district this morning issued an emergency restraining order against, quote, all military personnel acting under Operation Constitutional Anchor. One judge, a single judge in an unknown district with no mechanism to enforce that order right now. But who issued it anyway? because that is what you do when you took an oath.
We have casualty numbers that I need to update. This is hard information, and I want to deliver it carefully. Across the 6 cities we have been tracking, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and now Philadelphia, where we are receiving our first reports of significant unrest. Across those 6 cities, our wire service is aggregating reports from emergency services, hospitals, and field correspondents where available. The aggregate estimate we can construct as of 4 hours into this event is approximately 160 civilian injuries requiring medical attention. 14 confirmed deaths. I want to say that number carefully. 14. Not from military strikes, not from bombardment, from the secondary effects of what is happening. Traffic collisions during mass evacuations on the highways. 2 people who died in a crowd crush at Washington Dulles Airport before military personnel established a perimeter. 1 person who died of a cardiac event. 1 person who died in what appears to have been a confrontation. The details are unclear. Near a government building in downtown Philadelphia. Those are 14 human lives in 4 hours. 14 families who woke up this morning with no idea.
I'm going to be quiet for a moment after Alex says that number, because I think it deserves that. 14 people. And we are only 4 hours in, and the casualty count will rise. It will rise because it always does. Because every hour that passes without a resolution is another hour of traffic accidents and crowd events and medical emergencies that can't get through and panic making bad decisions. The number will rise. And we will say those numbers on this radio because they are real. Because numbers represent people. Because 14 is not an abstraction. 14 is a woman whose daughter has been calling her phone for 3 hours and getting no answer. 14 is a man who was in the wrong place because he was trying to get home to his family. 14 is 14 sets of everything, childhood, history, love, the particular way a person laughs, gone this morning. And the people who planned this, whoever they are, whatever they believed they were doing, they knew those numbers would rise. They planned for it. They built those costs into their operation and decided they were acceptable.
We have a statement, a new statement. This one is not from the military. This is a statement that has just been released through what appears to be a secure government continuity channel, and it is attributed to the Vice President of the United States. I'm going to read this in full. The statement reads, "I am the Vice President of the United States. I am safe and I am in a secure location. I am in contact with the leadership of both chambers of Congress and with the relevant legal and constitutional authorities. Let me be unambiguous. What is occurring under the name Operation Constitutional Anchor has no legal authority and no constitutional standing. The President of the United States has not resigned, has not been removed through any constitutional process, and has not authorized this action. The Congress of the United States is not suspended. The courts of the United States are not suspended. I am invoking the emergency succession protocols of the United States Code and affirming that civilian constitutional authority remains intact and continues to operate. I am calling on all members of the armed forces, all law enforcement agencies, all federal civilian employees, and all officers of the courts to continue to operate under civilian authority and to disregard orders that have not been lawfully issued. This is not over. We are fighting for this country through every legal and constitutional means available to us. Hold on. End of statement.
Oh, that matters. That matters enormously. And I want to make sure our listeners understand why. Because up until this moment, in 4 hours of coverage, we had heard one statement from the Department of Defense. We had heard one broadcast from a figure claiming to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And we had heard silence from every elected official. And now we have a vice president who has said on record, officially, I am here. I am the lawful authority. This is illegal. Do not comply. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the critical seed of institutional resistance. The Vice President of the United States, speaking from a secure location, has just told every soldier, every federal worker, every police officer in this country, you have a choice. And here is what the lawful choice looks like. The question now is whether anyone hears it, whether it reaches the people it needs to reach, whether the people who need to make that choice will make it.
And practically speaking, the question is also whether the Vice President can make that statement credible through action. A statement is powerful, but institutions are not held or lost by statements alone. The Vice President needs the cooperation of specific people in specific places to make civilian authority operational again. She needs at least some military commanders to stand down or switch sides. She needs access to communications infrastructure. She needs the ability to convene enough of the government that the government can function. Whether she has any of those things, we do not know. But the fact that she was able to get this statement out, through whatever channel she used, suggests that the communications lockdown is not complete. There are cracks in it, and cracks are important. In large systems, cracks are where change begins. We are 4 hours and 12 minutes into this event, and I want to be honest with our listeners about where we believe things stand. This is not over. The coup has not been consolidated. The civilian government has not collapsed. But the situation remains extremely dangerous, extremely fluid, and extremely uncertain.
We have another caller. This person says their name is David. David says he's calling from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Fort Bragg is one of the largest military installations in the world, home to the 82nd Airborne Division, Special Forces, and a range of other elite units. David says he is not active military, but he is a contractor who works on the base, and he was on his way to work this morning when he was turned back at the gate. He says the MP, the military police who turned him back, looked, and I'm quoting David's description, scared. He says the MP told him in a very low voice before he turned away that things inside are not settled. He says he sat in his car in the parking lot of a gas station near the base, and he's been watching vehicles coming and going. He says traffic patterns are unusual. Some vehicles moving out, some moving in, and what he describes as a standoff feeling, his words, near the main gate. If David's account is accurate, and again, we cannot verify it, it suggests that even at the largest Army installation in the country, there is internal tension. That is significant. It is significant because Special Operations Forces at Fort Bragg have their own chain of command, their own institutional culture, and their own understanding of what the Constitution requires of them. If those forces are not unified behind this operation, then Operation Constitutional Anchor faces a very serious problem.
We are tracking a situation that is developing rapidly at sea, and I want to bring our listeners up to date on this because it has significant implications. Earlier I mentioned that the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group had gone radio silent in the Atlantic. We now have a report, again, from a source we cannot fully verify, but whose information has been consistent with everything else we've received this morning, that a second carrier strike group, the USS Nimitz Group, which was in the Pacific operating out of San Diego, has made a statement through internal naval communications. Our source relays the content of that statement as follows. The commanding admiral of the Nimitz Strike Group has reportedly declared through an encrypted channel that his command does not recognize the authority of Operation Constitutional Anchor and is standing by to support the lawful civilian government of the United States. If that is accurate, we have the first major military formation actively aligning with the Vice President's position. We also have a report from an Air National Guard base in Ohio. I won't specify the base for security reasons, where our source says that the base commander is refusing orders that did not come through the normal civilian chain of command. We may be watching in real time the beginning of a crack in the military unity that any coup requires to succeed.
I want to read something that just came in through our public inbox. This is from a person who identifies themselves as having no political background, no military background, nothing extraordinary about their life except that they live in a small town in Pennsylvania, and they want us to know that this morning their town pulled together in a way they have never seen before. They write, by 7 a.m. people started gathering at the town square. Nobody organized it, Nobody called anyone. People just showed up. Retired teachers and farmers, and the guy who owns the hardware store and the woman who runs the diner. We set up a table with information. We have 3 people who have shortwave radios, and they're sharing what they're hearing. The pastor opened the church, and people can go there to sit and pray or just not be alone. The volunteer fire department is doing wellness checks on elderly residents who live alone. I don't know if any of this matters in the big picture, but in our little corner of the country, people are taking care of each other, and I wanted you to know that, because I think it matters. I think it matters too. I know it matters. That is not a small thing. That is a very large thing, wearing the clothes of a small thing.
We are approaching the end of our 4th hour on air, and I want to give our listeners the clearest possible picture of where things stand as of right now. Washington, D.C. remains under military presence, but control is contested. The Capitol building is physically held by forces loyal to Operation Constitutional Anchor, but the Vice President has spoken and is building what appears to be a counter-authority. Nationally, military units are beginning to fracture. We have confirmed non-compliance from at least one naval command and reported non-compliance from Air National Guard units and individual commanders at multiple installations. Internationally, the response is significant. Canada has closed border crossings. NATO has convened in emergency session. The United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Australia have all issued statements of non-recognition of Operation Constitutional Anchor's authority. Japan has called in the U.S. ambassador for an emergency meeting. These international statements matter because they create political and diplomatic pressure that even a military government cannot fully ignore.
On the human level, at 4 hours in, here is what we know. An estimated 173 civilian injuries are reported across the most affected cities. 22 confirmed deaths. 22 people. The vast majority of those fatalities occurred in evacuation accidents. The desperate, dangerous arithmetic of millions of people all deciding to move at the same time through infrastructure that was never designed for emergency mass exodus. The Dallas Love Field incident, which we are now hearing involved a runway incursion by a vehicle onto an active tarmac as 2 aircraft were taxiing, has resulted in at least 3 deaths and multiple injuries. Hospitals in Washington, Chicago, Dallas, Philadelphia, and Atlanta are all operating under elevated emergency protocols. Blood banks in multiple cities are requesting donations through emergency channels, which is remarkable because it suggests that the impulse of ordinary people to help is alive and active even in the middle of this chaos. People are driving to blood banks to donate. People are showing up.
And I need to update the power grid situation, because this is escalating. Our contact in the Mid-Atlantic grid network has reached us again. He is reporting that as of approximately 20 minutes ago, a more significant load disruption began. He is using the word cascading, a cascading failure in the interconnected grid. He says that whatever selective disruption was happening before has now begun to propagate in ways that may not be fully under anyone's control. He says that parts of Maryland and Northern Virginia are now experiencing rolling blackouts that were not part of the original selective pattern. He says that once you start manipulating a grid of this complexity, the downstream effects can exceed what you planned for. He used the phrase, "You can start a fire, and then the fire goes where it wants." We are not at a national grid emergency yet. But I want listeners in the Mid-Atlantic corridor to be aware. Charge your phones, charge any battery devices, locate your flashlights, find your stored water. Do this now, before you need to.
The 4-hour mark, and I want to say something that I've been holding for most of this broadcast because I wasn't sure when the right moment was, and I think the right moment is now. What we are watching is an attempt to take this country by force. Not with bombs, not with foreign armies, but from the inside, by people who swore an oath to this country and decided that their judgment about what the country needed overrode the judgment of the people who elected the government. That is the nature of what this is. And I want to say that because the language of constitutional continuity, operations, and anchoring democracy, and all the careful framing is designed to obscure that simple, terrible fact. But the 22 people who are dead this morning are dead because of a choice that was made. the families separated on bridges over the Niagara River, and the people stranded in airports, and the nurse in Atlanta trying to explain to her bedridden patients why the protocols have changed, all of that is the downstream consequence of a choice made by people, and that matters. It matters for how we understand what is happening, and it matters for how the next hours of this story unfold.
We are getting breaking information. This is significant. We are receiving reports, and these are coming in simultaneously from 3 separate sources, that elements of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg have deployed, but not in support of Operation Constitutional Anchor. They appear to have deployed in a direction that places them between Washington, D.C., and the military units currently holding the Capitol complex. That is a military posture that, in plain language, means the 82nd Airborne may be moving to challenge the coup rather than support it. The 82nd Airborne is one of the most capable rapid deployment forces on Earth. If its commanding officers have decided to side with the Vice President's authority, that changes the military balance of this event significantly. We do not know this for certain. We are working every source we have, but the reports are consistent, and they are coming from people who have been accurate all morning.
And if that is true, then what we may be watching is the beginning of this ending. Not because violence is the answer. It is never the answer, and more people will almost certainly be hurt before this is over, Bob. But because the foundational assumption of any coup is that the military acts as one. And the moment that assumption breaks, the moment the people with the weapons begin choosing sides based on their oath rather than their orders, the logic of the coup begins to unravel. We don't know yet. We genuinely don't know how this ends, but I believe, and I say this with everything I have, that the people we've heard from this morning, the nurse in Atlanta, the woman on the bridge in Port Huron, the retired federal employee calling the Capitol switchboard, the small town in Pennsylvania that just showed up at the square, all of them, every single one of them, is a data point in a story that isn't finished yet. And unfinished stories can still go different ways.
Stay with us. Keep this frequency open. This is Alex Mercer and Sierra Lane on Silent Waves Radio. We are here. We will keep broadcasting as long as we can. The story is not over. We will be here until it is. We are now 4 hours and 38 minutes into coverage of what is being called Operation Constitutional Anchor. And I can tell you that this hour has seen the most significant developments of the morning. Let me start with a confirmed report. The 82nd Airborne Division, approximately 3,000 personnel in its lead brigades, is on the move. According to 2 military sources who have now independently confirmed this, the Airborne's deployment is oriented toward a security cordon around what is being described as the Lawful Government Assembly Point, meaning a location outside Washington, D.C., where the Vice President, along with a growing number of congressional members, is apparently attempting to establish operational continuity of the civilian government. The Vice President's legal team has invoked the Presidential Succession Act. They have formally documented, through 3 independent legal clerks, that the President of the United States remains the lawful executive authority and has not abdicated that authority. They have drafted orders releasing him from military custody. Whether those orders can be executed is another question, but they exist. They are on record, and they are legally significant.
And while that machinery of constitutional law is grinding forward, here on the ground across this country, the human cost continues to accumulate. We are now at 31 confirmed deaths. That number rose this hour due primarily to 2 specific incidents. In Chicago, an evacuation accident on the Dan Ryan Expressway involving multiple vehicles resulted in 7 fatalities. That accident was caused by gridlock so severe that emergency responders could not reach the scene for over 45 minutes. In Los Angeles, we have finally reestablished contact with our affiliate, briefly, and they tell us that in the San Fernando Valley area, there was an incident at a hospital, a medical center where backup generators were insufficient to maintain critical life support for patients when the local power grid experienced its disruption. We do not have a full count from that incident. We have a number that our affiliate communicated before the line dropped again. at least 4 patients. 4 patients who were on life support when the power failed and whose generators could not sustain them.
I want to name that clearly. 4 people who were in a hospital receiving medical care, who were not part of any political conflict, who had nothing to do with Operation Constitutional Anchor, or the Vice President's counter-authority, or the 82nd Airborne, or any of it. 4 people who needed machines to live and whose machines stopped, are dead because infrastructure was disrupted as part of a military operation. That is not a secondary statistic. That is a direct consequence line between a decision made in a command room and 4 human beings. I believe in stating that line explicitly because it should not be abstracted away by the scale of what we're covering. 31 deaths. Each one has that line.
We have a communication. This one is coming through our standard listener line, and the caller is extremely distressed, so I'm going to relay what they told our producer. This person works as a school bus driver in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. This morning, as all of this was beginning, they were in the middle of their route. They had 23 children on the bus. They could not reach the school. They could not reach the parents. Communications were intermittent. They made a decision to pull the bus into a church parking lot, a church they had driven past every single workday for 11 years. And they sat with those 23 children for the past 3.5 hours. They taught the children songs. They told stories. They kept the bus running for heat. And one by one, parents found them. Found out where they were somehow, through neighbors, through the church reaching out, through the extraordinary informal network of human connection that technology didn't create and technology can't destroy. 23 children. All 23 of them have been reunited with their families. The bus driver, who wouldn't give a name, just wanted us to know. Just wanted someone to know that all 23 were okay.
All 23 were okay. Alongside the 31, I want to hold that too. And I want to update listeners on international response because it has escalated significantly in the past hour. The United Nations Security Council has convened an emergency session. An emergency session requested simultaneously by the United Kingdom, France, and Canada, all permanent or non-permanent members with significant procedural standing. Russia and China, notably, have not blocked the emergency session, which is diplomatically unusual and suggests that major global powers are not willing to openly endorse what is happening here. NATO has issued a formal statement that it does not recognize the authority of any military government in the United States, and that it is pausing cooperative military protocols with U.S. military commands pending clarification of civilian authority, which means that American military units operating abroad are in a state of profound institutional confusion about whom they serve. The global financial markets, in the countries where trading is still occurring, have experienced what can only be described as a historic disruption. The dollar has fallen sharply. Global exchanges are volatile. Supply chains that touch American ports, and nearly every supply chain on Earth touches American ports in some form, are beginning to plan for disruption.
The world is not watching from a safe distance. The world is inside this event now. Because the United States is not a country you can simply contain. Its economy, its military, its communications infrastructure are threaded through everything. When the United States fractures, the vibration travels everywhere, and people all over the world this morning are watching their screens, their radios, their social media feeds, the ones that are still working, trying to understand what is happening here and what it means for them. A coup in the United States of America is not like a coup in a smaller country. A coup here reverberates. It changes the physics of the world, and everyone knows it.
At the 5-hour mark, we're approaching 5 hours on air. I can now give you what appears to be the most consequential development of this entire morning. It is a development that suggests we may be approaching a resolution, though not a painless one. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Hargrove, who made the original broadcast, has issued a new statement, a second statement, and this statement is markedly different in tone and content from the first. I'm going to read it carefully. The statement reads, To all personnel serving under Operation Constitutional Anchor, I am aware that there are elements within the military establishment who are moving to oppose this operation. I want to address those personnel directly. What we undertook this morning was intended to preserve the constitutional order of this nation against forces that we believed were destroying it from within. I still believe that our cause was just. But I have also come to recognize in the past hour that the method we chose, military authority as a substitute for civilian process, is itself incompatible with the Constitution we sought to protect. I cannot ask good soldiers to fire on good soldiers over my interpretation of what justice required. Effective immediately, I am ordering all personnel under Operation Constitutional Anchor to stand down and return to their assigned posts. I take full responsibility for these events. I am prepared to face the legal and constitutional consequences of my actions. God bless the United States of America. End of statement.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs has called off the coup. 5 hours and 4 minutes in. He has called it off. I want to let that land because this morning when I came to work and none of this was happening yet, I would not have believed that this was a sentence I would ever say on this radio. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs has called off the coup, which means that the institution's held. Not perfectly, not without cost, not without 31 lives and hundreds of injuries in airports full of stranded passengers and a bus driver sitting with 23 children in a church parking lot and a woman on a bridge in Port Huron and a nurse in Atlanta and a judge who issued a restraining order with no way to enforce it and a retired federal employee calling the Capitol switchboard over and over. All of that happened. All of that is real. But the thing that was attempted this morning, the seizure of this government by force, has failed. And the reason it failed is that enough people said no.
I want to be careful about optimism right now, because the immediate aftermath of a coup attempt, even a failed one, is extraordinarily dangerous. 31 people are dead. There are military units in cities across this country that received a stand-down order 11 minutes ago and need time to actually stand down. There are still people in airports who don't know what's happening. There are still patients in hospitals whose power may or may not be restored in the next hour. There are still people on that bridge. There are still frightened families and locked buildings and streets that feel unsafe. The stand-down order is the beginning of a process of recovery, not the end of the crisis. In the next hours and days, this country will face the extraordinary challenge of accounting for what just happened, legally, politically, institutionally, while simultaneously trying to restore the normal functioning of government and civilian life. That will be hard. That will take time. There will be more pain before there is peace.
And there will have to be an accounting. There will have to be an honest and full accounting of what happened and who decided it and what the chain of command looked like and who knew and who should have known and what systems failed to catch this before 5 a.m. on a Tuesday. Because this did not come from nowhere. Operations of this scale and sophistication do not improvise themselves. People planned this. People trained for it. People agreed with it and enabled it and looked away from things they saw and decided that what they believed was right mattered more than the process by which right and wrong are supposed to be determined in a democracy. And we cannot simply exhale and turn the page. Because the 31 people who died this morning cannot turn the page. And the families they left behind cannot turn the page. And the fragile, hard-won, imperfect institution of democratic self-governance, which came very close this morning to being taken from us, deserves better than a shrug and a return to normal.
As we come to the close of what has now been 5 hours and 21 minutes of continuous coverage, I want to give our listeners the final picture as completely as I can. Confirmed fatalities, 31. With that number likely to rise as incident reports come in from Los Angeles and other areas where communication was disrupted. Injuries reported, just under 250. Cities most severely affected: Washington, D.C., Chicago, Dallas, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. Infrastructure damage. Partial power outages affecting an estimated 6 to 9 million people in the mid-Atlantic region, with restoration projected to take 48 to 72 hours in the hardest hit areas. Commercial aviation, grounded nationally, expected to resume in phases over the next 24 hours as the FAA confirms safety at each facility. Ports, the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Baltimore, remain under elevated security protocol but have not been permanently damaged. Every road, every bridge, every airport, every hospital is still there. The infrastructure of this country is intact. Wounded, disrupted, stressed, but intact.
The government of the United States is intact. Damaged, shaken, in need of significant repair and honest examination, but intact. The Vice President is intact. The courts are intact, the Congress is intact, and the people, 330 million people in all their complexity and disagreement and courage and fear, are intact. Some of them are standing in town squares in Pennsylvania, and some of them are on bridges over the Niagara River, and some of them are in hospital waiting rooms, and some of them are in cockpits of planes sitting on tarmacs waiting for the all clear. And some of them are driving home to their families right now, and some of them will never drive home again. But they are here. We are here. This country is still here.
General Thomas Hargrove and the senior officers who planned and executed Operation Constitutional Anchor will face courts-martial and federal prosecution under existing law. The President of the United States has been reported to be physically unharmed and was released from the facility where he was being held approximately 40 minutes ago. Congressional leadership is convening emergency sessions. Ironically, for the first time in 5 hours, the Capitol building is being unlocked by the very military personnel who locked it, following General Hargrove's stand-down order. The world is still watching. The markets will be turbulent. The questions that were asked this morning about the health of democratic institutions are not going away because the coup failed. In some ways, those questions are more urgent now because we know what was possible. We know what was attempted. We know how close it came.
31 people. I keep returning to that number. I will return to it for the rest of my life because they are the true measure of this morning. Not the constitutional drama, not the geopolitical consequences, not the historical significance. 31 people who woke up this morning and didn't know. And I want to say their lives mattered before today, and they matter today, and they matter in whatever comes after today. And I want to say that to the families of those people specifically, you are in our hearts. We have been saying that phrase all morning, in our hearts. And I want to mean it in the most specific, concrete way I can. Your grief is real. Your loss is real. What happened to the person you love was real, and it was not necessary, and it should not have happened. And a country that survives this morning owes it to them to make sure that the next attempt, and I fear there will be a next attempt if we do not do the hard work, that the next attempt fails before anyone dies at all.
This is Alex Mercer. This has been 5 hours and 34 minutes of continuous coverage on Silent Waves Radio. We are going to take a brief pause in our live coverage to allow our team to coordinate with incoming reports and to prepare for the extended coverage that the coming hours will require. But I want to say something before we do. We stayed on the air this morning because we believed it was the right thing to do. Because in a moment of information chaos, the job of journalism is to be a fixed point, to be the thing that doesn't move so that people who are lost can navigate by it. We don't know if we did that well enough. We know we tried, and we know that the signal held.
The signal held, and so did you. Every listener who stayed with us this morning, every person who shared this frequency with a neighbor, or drove to check on someone, or sat in a church parking lot with 23 children and told them stories. You held too. This is Silent Waves Radio. We are still here, and so are you. And that, this morning, is everything.
We'll be back in 10 minutes with expanded coverage as new information continues to come in. Stay with us.